How I Caught My Sister and Kate's Boyfriend. This story portrays betrayal. It shows how betrayal can come from the people that are very close to us. This story details how I caught my sister and her closest friend's husband. Who would have thought my sister could do what she did? Sit back and enjoy how everything played out in this story. Many years ago, my dad settled in a small community in the city of Alabama. My dad was the third person to occupy a house in the community. 5 years after, he met my mom at his friend's party. He approached my mom and she agreed to date him. 2 years after, they got married officially. 6 months after my mom and my dad got married, Mr. John built a house close to my dad's house. So they became very close friends. A year after their marriage, my parents gave birth to me. 2 years after, they gave birth to my younger sister. Because of Mr. John and my dad's friends, he usually comes to our house anytime he likes. One day, my mother's friend Mrs. Mariah came to visit my mom to congratulate her on the birth of my younger sister. Fortunately, Mr. John came in while Mrs. Mariah was still around. My mom noticed how Mr. John couldn't take his eyes off Mrs. Mariah's boobs. He kept staring at every part of her body without minding who was looking at him. When Mrs. Mariah left, my mom called Mr. John and asked him why he couldn't take his eyes off her guest. She said she felt embarrassed by the way he was looking at her. Mr. John apologized to my mom for making her guest uncomfortable. He said he kept looking at her because he liked her. He pleaded with my mom to give him Mrs. Mariah's cell phone number. My mom said she cannot give out Mrs. Mariah's number unless she asks Mrs. Mariah herself. She said if Mrs. Mariah tells her to give him her number, she will, but if she does not, there is nothing she can do. My mom picked her phone in the presence of Mr. John and called her friend Mrs. Mariah. First, she appreciated her for coming to greet her. After that, she tabled Mr. John's request to her. Mrs. Mariah told my mom to give Mr. John her number. When my mom ended the call, she took a pen and paper and wrote Mrs. Mariah's number on it. After writing it, she handed it over to Mr. John. Mr. John appreciated my mom and left. When Mr. John got to his apartment, the first thing he did was to call Mrs. Mariah. He introduced himself to her and he told her how he got her cell phone number. He told her that he has a lot of things to tell her, but he cannot say it on the phone. Mrs. Mariah insisted that he should say it on the phone, but he declined. He said he would like to see her before he can say what he wants to say. Because of Mr. John's persistence, Mrs. Mariah agreed to see him. She said she will come to his house on Saturday. At exactly 9 a.m. on Saturday, Mrs. Mariah was at our house. My mom told me to show Mrs. Mariah where Mr. John lives. I took Mrs. Mariah to Mr. John's house. Immediately I showed her the door. I went back to our house. 1 hour after, my mom wanted to pass information across to Mrs. Mariah, but she wasn't able to do so because she wasn't able to reach Mrs. Mariah on her cell phone. When she tried calling her multiple times without any response, she sent me there to check on Mrs. Mariah. When I got there, I knocked on the door gently, but there was no response. I knocked for more than 2 minutes without any response. When I didn't get any response, I pushed the door and it opened. All this while I have been knocking. I didn't know that the door was open. When I entered inside, I didn't see anybody in the sitting room. As I moved closer to the room, I heard how Mrs. Mariah was moaning. Her moaning was so loud that Mr. John had to cover her mouth with his hand. I wanted to know why she was moaning, so I went out of the room and started piping through the window. The window was very big, so I saw everything. I saw Mr. John on top of Mrs. Mariah. He used his left hand to cover her mouth to prevent people from hearing her moan. He was using his right hand to rub all over her body. Anytime he noticed that her moaning has stopped, he would kiss her. From where I was watching, you could see that Mrs. Mariah was enjoying the kissing. I could see how she was drawing Mr. John back to her when she attempts to get up on her. I watched them as they were on top of each other for 5 minutes. I didn't want to knock on the door so that Mrs. Mariah would not think that I saw what they were doing, and I didn't know what to tell my mom when I returned home. I stood at the window and watched them till they finished what they were doing. When I saw that Mr. John was not on top of Mrs. Mariah anymore, I went to the door and knocked. This time, Mrs. Mariah answered. She was sweating profusely because of what she had just done. As soon as she came out, I told her what my mom said I should tell her. She sent me back to my mom. She said I should tell my mom that she will see her before leaving. Immediately I heard that I left her presence, and I made my way back to her house. When I got home, my mom asked me why I stayed that long. It was a question I expected, so I prepared for it. I told my mom that I helped Mr. John do some home chores. I told her when I got there, Mrs. Mariah was the one doing the home chores, so I joined her. I told her that Mrs. Mariah promised to stop by when she is going to her house. 2 hours after, Mrs. Mariah came to our house in the company of Mr. John. You could see how happy they were. When Mr. John noticed that Mrs. Mariah and my mom were engaged in a conversation. He sneaked out without anyone noticing. When my mom looked back, she didn't see Mr. John. She asked me where he was and I told her that I did not know when he left. When my mom knew that Mr. John had left, she changed the topic of the conversation to what happened at Mr. John's house. She asked her friend what went down there. Mrs. Mariah said nothing went down. She said Mr. John told her he wants them to be more than friends. He said if she agrees to his proposal, he will get married to her very soon. My mom was surprised by what she heard because since she knew Mr. John, he has never talked to her about marriage, nor has she seen him with a woman in his house before. She told Mrs. Mariah that she cannot count the number of times that my dad has told him to get a woman. My mom asked Mrs. Mariah about what Mr. John told her. Mrs. Mariah said she likes him but she wants to take her time before making a decision. She said my mom knows how much pain men have caused her, so she wants to take her time before taking any decision this time around. My mom told her that she understood everything she has said perfectly. She told her that since she met Mr. John, she doesn't know him to be a bad person. She has always known him to be a person of impeccable character and moral uprightness. She told Mrs. Mariah that one of the reasons Mr. John and her husband are so close is because of his moral uprightness. While Mrs. Mariah was leaving, my mom urged her to think about it very well and make the best decision that will suit her and her career. Mrs. Mariah appreciated my mom for her advice, and she promised to make the best decision for herself. When Mrs. Mariah left, I kept remembering the scenes I saw in Mr. John's house. At first, I thought she was going to tell my mom when she asked her what happened in Mr. John's house. My dad arrived at exactly 7 p.m. As soon as he took his shower and settled in the dining, my mom began to tell him what happened between Mr. John and Mrs. Mariah. She told him that for the first time, Mr. John is taking steps to become a married man. My dad was happy with what he heard. He said he cannot wait for his friend to become a married man. 1 week after, Mrs. Mariah called my mom. She told my mom she has finally decided to agree with Mr. John's proposal. She said she will call him in the evening after work to tell him. My mom appreciated her. She said it's a decision she won't regret presently or in the future. When Mr. John left his workplace, he stopped at our house. When he entered our house, my mom was expecting him to talk about Mrs. Mariah, but he didn't. My dad wanted to ask him, but my mom cautioned him silently. She whispered to him not to ask him. While Mr. John was discussing with my parents, his phone rang. He brought out his phone, but he did not answer the call. The call came in the second time, but he didn't answer the call again. At that point, Mr. John became uncomfortable. He wasn't flowing with the conversation anymore. You could see that he wanted to leave urgently, but he didn't know how to excuse himself. When my mom noticed that, she went inside her room and called my father. My father didn't want to leave his seat, but she kept calling him repeatedly. When my dad left his seat to attend to my mom, Mr. John immediately took his leave. When my dad entered my mom's room, she told him that she called him so that Mr. John can be able to leave. She told him that it seems the person that was calling him repeatedly is Mrs. Mariah. She told my dad that she has something important to tell Mr. John. Before my dad and my mom returned to the sitting room, they did not meet Mr. John. When John got home, he immediately put a call through to Mariah. He wanted to apologize to her for not picking her call, but she told him not to worry. She told him she knew he was with my parent, which was why he did not answer his call. Mr. John became relieved when he heard that. Mrs. Mariah said she called to discuss an important issue with him. She said she has been thinking of what he told her since the day she came to her house. She said it's a tough decision for her to take because she has suffered a lot. She said the decision she was about to take now was aided by my mom. She said my mom told her how upright and moral he was. She said she has agreed to his proposal. She said she hopes it's a decision she doesn't regret whether presently or in the future. Upon hearing what Mrs. Mariah said, Mr. John jumped for joy. He told Mrs. Mariah that she told him had made his day. He said this was probably his best day on earth. The next day, Mr. John came to our house with a smiling face. He was so happy that you could see it on his face. He didn't know that my parents knew what was making him smile, but they just pretended as if they didn't know anything. He and my parents started their conversation as usual. A few minutes into the conversation, he got a call. He brought out his phone and checked who was calling him. When he saw that the call was from Mrs. Mariah, he returned his phone to his pocket and silenced it. My parents were expecting him to talk about what Mrs. Mariah told him, but he didn't say anything. A few minutes after, he excused himself. When he went out, I saw him talking to Mrs. Mariah on his phone. After talking for more than 15 minutes on his phone, he returned to the sitting room to join my parents. When he entered, my mom asked him who he was talking to on the phone that kept him outside for so long. At that point, He decided to let the cat out of the bag, not knowing that my parents were aware of everything that happened. Mr. John said it was Mrs. Mariah that kept him out for so long. He said she has agreed to have an affair with him. My parents pretended as if they didn't know anything and jumped for joy. They congratulated Mr. John and urged him to make the wedding as fast as possible. 2 weeks after, Mr. John came to our house very early in the morning. He said he wants my dad to follow him to Mrs. Mariah's family house. He said Mrs. Mariah has told her parents about their relationship, and they have requested to see him. He said he doesn't want to go alone because he doesn't know what is waiting for him over there. My dad rushed to the bathroom to take his bath. After taking his bath, my mom served both of them breakfast. After breakfast, they entered Mr. John's car and left. After about 6 hours, they returned home. My dad entered our house while Mr. John went to his house. As soon as my dad entered the house, he asked for his food. He said the journey they undertook was very stressful. He said they had to leave there because of the distance. When my mom gave him his food, she sat close to him on the couch. She asked him what happened, where they went to. My dad said they were welcomed very well by Mariah's parents. He said they talked about other things like the wedding date, the wedding venue, and other things related to the wedding. He said they chose Sunday, January 5, 2020 for the wedding, and the venue is the Garden Place in Alabama. As soon as she heard that from my dad, she was very happy. She picked her phone immediately and called Mrs. Mariah. She congratulated her on her upcoming wedding and urged her to take very good care of herself for her new groom. A week before the wedding, Mrs. Mariah relocated to our house because she and my mom were the ones planning the wedding. My mom was in charge of almost all of the preparations for the wedding. 3 days before the wedding, my mom was very busy like she has never been. She was going from one place to another just to make sure that the preparation is in top gear. A day before the wedding, my mother did not come home. She called my dad at around 9 p.m. that she cannot make it back home because she has a lot of things to do at the venue. She said the venue decorators and the caterers need her attention very early in the morning of the wedding. She said if she comes home, it will be difficult for her to get to the venue very early. She said if she doesn't get there early, the preparations might not go according to plan. She said it was that and other reasons that made her book a room at a nearby hotel close to the venue. My dad wished her well and told her to take very good care of herself. He said she should call him if she needs anything. On Sunday morning, which was the day of the wedding, my father woke me up from sleep very early. He told me and my sister to take our bath and join him in his car. He said we have to get to the venue of the wedding very early so that we can help my mom. I hurriedly entered my bathroom while my sister went to my mom's bathroom. After taking our bath, we changed into our wedding outfit and joined our dad in the car. After about 1 hour and 30 minutes, we arrived at the venue of the wedding. I saw my mom going from one place to another just to make sure everything is according to plan. My sister and I joined her in carrying some of the drinks she brought to a more secure place. My dad left us at the venue and went to Mr. John's hotel. After 2 hours of moving from one place to another, my mom finally settled down on a chair. She rested for 15 minutes before she went back to her hotel to take her bath and change into her wedding outfits. While she was going, she left my sister and me at the venue to monitor all the items. 30 minutes after my mom left, she returned to the venue in her wedding dress. Her dress was so beautiful that everybody she met when she came back complimented what she wore. My mom dressed as if she was the bride of the day. The wedding was colorful. People from all spheres of life attended the wedding. There was a lot to eat and drink at the wedding. The couples thrilled their guests with nice dancing moves. The highlight of the event for me was when my mom and dad were called to the dancing floor by the anchor of the event. My sister and I could not contain our joy when we saw our parents on the dance floor. My sister joined them on the dance floor, but I didn't because I was very shy. The wedding ended at about 7 p.m. As soon as the guests started leaving, the couples went to their hotel rooms. My sister and I joined my mom in cleaning and washing all the items used at the wedding. We finished the cleaning around 10 p.m. My mom suggested that we should go back to the hotel because it was late, while my dad said we can still go to our house. We left there at around 10:15 and arrived home at midnight. As soon as we got home, we all went to our rooms. None of us woke up until 11 a.m. the next day. I was the first to wake up. When I checked the time, it was 11 a.m. I was wondering how I slept for that long. I went to my parents' room to check up on them, but they were still sleeping. I left them and went to the kitchen to get something to eat. My mom woke up at exactly 12:15 p.m. She couldn't believe her eyes when she checked the time. She woke my dad, who was still enjoying his sleep. When my dad opened his eyes, he was also surprised. He said he knew he was going to be very tired after the wedding. That was why he told them at the office that he won't be coming to work. My parents woke up very hungry. so my mom had to rush to the kitchen to prepare what we are going to eat. They didn't know that I had already sorted myself out in the kitchen. Therefore, I pretended as if I hadn't eaten. At exactly 2:15 p.m., my mom served our food. We all gathered at the dining. As we were eating, we were discussing what went down at the party the previous day. Everyone was talking about their highlights of the event. My dad said his highlight of the event was when the couples were called to the dancing floor. He said he didn't believe that his friend was going to dance because, for over a decade that he has known him, he has never seen him dancing. He said he was surprised when he saw his friend rocking the dance floor with his wife. My mom said she didn't have any major highlights because she was coordinating everything from where she stood. She said she is happy that everything went according to plan. When it came to my turn to speak, I told them that my highlight of the event was when both of them were called to the dancing floor. For me, it was bigger than the bride and the groom's dance. My mom and dad laughed. They asked me why I did not join them on the dance floor. I said they knew right from the time that I am a very shy person. I cannot dance in front of a large number of people. After the meal, my dad said he still needs some sleep. As soon as he went in, my mom followed him. My sister also stood up and went to her room. I was the only one left in the sitting room. When there was nothing to do, I picked up my novel and started reading. A week after the wedding, the couples returned home. We were in the sitting room when we heard a knock on our door. I went to the door to see who was knocking. Lo and behold, I saw the couples standing in front of our door. I screamed and hugged the couples so tightly. They entered the sitting room and sat close to each other on the couch. My dad asked about their honeymoon. He said hope they enjoyed it and they replied in the affirmative. We talked about a lot of things. They appreciated my parent a lot for standing by them before, during, and after the wedding. After about 2 hours, the couple left our house. Mr. Mariah didn't go to work for the Fitz 2 weeks after the wedding. As soon as her husband leaves for work, she will come to our house. She will be at our house until 5 p.m. before she leaves. After the wedding, our relationship with the couples began to grow from strength to strength. We do almost everything together. If my father is invited to an event, he won't go except Mr. John agrees to follow him. My mom also does the same thing. 11 months after the wedding, Mrs. Mariah gave birth to a bouncing baby girl which she named Kate. The whole community was thrown into a frenzy mood with the arrival of Mrs. Mariah's daughter. As soon as she came back from the hospital, my mom moved to her house because she needed a lot of help and there was no one to help except my mother. My mom stayed with her for 1 month before returning home. Even when she returned home, she was still visiting her every day. She will go to her place in the morning and leave in the evening. My mom and Mrs. Mariah have been friends before she got married to Mr. John. The first day Mr. John saw Mrs. Mariah was in her house. These reasons and many more were my mom does not want Mrs. Mariah to experience any pain or suffering even for a second. 2 years after, Kate enrolled in my sister's school. Kate and my sister became very close because they did everything together. When Kate comes back from school, she will be with my sister in our house. Their friendship continued to grow stronger even though they were not of the same age. My sister graduated from school at 10 years old. She left Kate there who was still 7 years. My sister enrolled in St. Augustine High School after she graduated from the school. 3 years after, Kate graduated from primary school and joined my sister at St. Augustine High School. When school is on break or if Kate is free in her class, she usually goes to my sister's class to play. Soon, she started having suitors from boys in my sister's class. The first guy to approach her was Peter. One day, Kate came to my sister's class like she used to. She played with my sisters and her classmates like she used to. Peter sat somewhere waiting for Kate to leave so that he can follow her. As soon as Kate stepped her foot outside of the class, Peter followed her. While Kate was walking to her class, she heard someone calling her name from a close distance. As she turned back to see who was calling her, she met Peter standing in front of her. She asked him why he stopped her. Peter said he doesn't know where to start from. He said he has been taking a close look at her since she has been coming to their class. He said he has been waiting for the right time to tell her what he wants to tell her. He said he felt now is the right time. He said he wants her to know that he loves her and will do everything to have her. Kate looked at him and laughed. She said she appreciated him for having the courage to come to her, but she doesn't think she can have a relationship with him. Peter asked if she has anyone she was dating. She said that is not Peter's business. Peter said he will give her time to think about what he told her. He said maybe if she thinks about it, she might make a decision that will favor him. Kate said she doesn't need to think about anything. She said she has already taken her decision and her decision cannot change. Peter left Kate's presence heartbroken. He went to his class and sat alone without talking to anyone. His classmates kept asking him what happened to him, but he refused to talk to anyone. When Kate and my sister were going home after school, She narrated everything that happened with Peter to my sister. She told her how Peter approached her when she left their class, and she told her that she let him know immediately that she cannot date him. My sister said that was why he was moody and refused to anybody in the class. The next day, my sister went to Peter and told him that she knew why he was moody yesterday. She told him that Kate told her everything. Peter said he knew Kate would tell her because they are close friends. Peter told my sister to help him talk to Kate. He said if Kate agrees to date him, he would give my sister a wonderful gift. My sister told Peter to forget about Kate. She told Peter that she knows Kate very well. She said once Kate takes a decision, she doesn't change it. She told Peter to look elsewhere. 2 weeks after, another guy approached Kate. This time around, it was a guy in the senior class. He has been watching Kate for a long and he decided that day was the day he would do the needful. John waited for the school to close before approaching Kate. While Kate and my sister were going home, as usual, John stopped them. He asked Kate if he could speak to her for a few minutes. Kate told my sister to wait for her while she joined John. When she walked to where he was, she asked him why he stopped her. John said he knew she is going home, but he has to tell her what he has been craving to tell her for months. Kate asked him what he has been craving to tell her. John said he wants to go straight to the point because he doesn't want to waste her time. John told Kate that he loved her the first day she was brought to the school. He said, since then, he has been waiting for a day like this. He said he is a shy person, but he just summoned the courage to approach her today. John was a handsome boy, so almost every girl liked him. Kate told him that she has heard what he said. She said she will think about it and let him know her decision. Kate hurriedly joined my sister, and they continued their journey home. My sister asked Kate what John told her. Kate told my sister to guess what she thinks John told her. My sister said John wants to date her. Kate smiled and replied in the affirmative. My sister asked Kate what she thinks about John. Kate said she likes him. She said if she doesn't like him, she would have told him immediately that she is not interested. Kate said she will wait for 3 days or 1 week before accepting his proposal. 1 week after, Kate accepted John's proposal and they started dating. They were the topic of discussion in the school as they are seen in every place together. One day, Kate invited John to her house because she knew her parent would not be at home. When John arrived, he met Kate and my sister in the room. Unfortunately, Kate received a call from her mother that she should come and meet her in front of a mall. She left the house leaving John and my sister in the room. 5 minutes after Kate left, my sister and Peter were already having sex. I caught them when my mom told me to help her call my sister. When I got to the door, I saw them kissing. They were so engulfed in the kissing that they did not know when I entered. As soon as I saw them, I made my way out of the room. I stood in front of the door and I was watching how they were kissing themselves. Hey, guys, please let me know if this is right or if this is what I should do, or please let me have your thoughts on this. Let me have your thoughts on this. Let me have your thoughts on this. Let me